Okay, good evening, everybody. I am so happy to welcome all of you here onto the very important meeting. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm so happy to welcome all of you here to this wonderful evening that we have an opportunity to discuss the future of the community. We have been living through an incredible last 15 months, and as classically a theme as Judaism itself, we are forward-looking and future-orientated. The numbers here in Montreal, as far as the cases of COVID are going down, numbers here in Montreal, as far as the individuals receiving the vaccine, both the first dose and now the second dose, are going up. And that means that we are looking towards the future. What does it mean for the Jewish community, and specifically synagogues of Montreal and the broader community? And who better to discuss some of these important, timely questions than Rabbi Reuben Poupko and Rabbi Adam Scheier. Rabbi Reuben Poupko has been the rabbi of Beth Israel, Beth Aaron since 1986, although some say since 1886. He is the co-chair of the National Rabbinic Caucus. He is the chair for CIJA Quebec, past president of the RCA of Montreal, a past multiple chair of the March to the Living for many, many years, a leading Jewish spokesperson for our community on Israel and anti-Semitism. And perhaps his proudest moment and entry on his CV is that he himself is the father of two rabbis. We're joined here this evening with Rabbi Adam Scheier. Rabbi Adam Scheier is the rabbi of Congregation Shah Hashemayim, 1,300 member Orthodox synagogue in Westmount, past president of the Montreal Board of Rabbis, senior rabbinic fellow of Jerusalem's Hartman Institute, founder, member of the Board of Trustees of the International Rabbinic Fellowship. He is an individual who serves on the Rabbinic Advisory Board of Yeshivat Maharat. He is proud to be the rabbi of the first synagogue to hire a graduate of Yeshivat Maharat. Prior to his arrival in Montreal in 2004, Rabbi Scheier participated in the founding and development of the first yeshiva in post-World War II Germany, and has continued to work extensively with the immigrant Jewish community in Germany. Rabbi Scheier is married to Rabbi Abi, and they have been blessed with 5 children, all daughters, Avia, Ayelet, Anael, Allegra, and Arella. Rabbi Scheier, Rabbi Poupko, thank you so much for joining us here this evening. People are so eager and thirsty to hear what it is that you have to say. And I would like to present this evening very briefly at the beginning, by way of an introduction. If you can give us, please, just a snapshot of the shul that you represent and the demographic of the community where you live, please. This will be then briefly followed by an overview of what the synagogue looked like before COVID, followed by also very briefly what you have been doing during COVID. And then what I would like to focus on for the majority of our 45 minutes is going to be, what will the synagogue look like after COVID, the future of the synagogue. So Rabbi Poupko, if we can start with you, please, can you give us a very brief overview of the shul that you represent and your demographic, as well as a couple of moments of thought for what the shul looked like before the pandemic?
Well, as you so painfully reminded everyone of the length of my stay here earlier, which I'm sure is a source of great distress to many, I would say that just to give a thumbnail sketch, I would have to sketch some history as well. When I first came to Montreal, I think it was before you were born, Mark, I think. I'm here with 2 very junior colleagues who, anyway, we'll discuss it another time. And when I came here in '86, Côte Saint-Luc was a remarkably different place than it is today. When I got up in synagogue for the first time, I was here with Shavuot 1986. I was facing a congregation that was overwhelmingly European Holocaust survivors, an older congregation. And I have to say that the greatest blessing of my life as a rabbi has been the exposure to survivors. People don't believe this, but I didn't speak Yiddish until I moved to Montreal. I learned Yiddish from the survivors. I mean, I grew up hearing Yiddish, but I never really spoke it or had to speak it until I got here. In the 30, how many years I'm here, 35 years I'm here, there's been an enormous shift in who is sitting in front of me on a typical Shabbat. That group of Holocaust survivors, and I mean, not everyone was obviously, it was many children of survivors, were overwhelmingly affiliated Orthodox, but not practicing Orthodox Jews. Today, when I stand up in my synagogue, I have the lobbies packed with baby carriages, or used to be before COVID, and everyone, 95% in front of me are people who are Shomer Shabbat. It's a radical change in Côte Saint-Luc. Côte Saint-Luc, you would drive through on a Shabbat in 1986, and you wouldn't see kippahs and people walking with their towels in the street. Today, that's normal. Well, I'll tell you one major change is when I came in '86 and I was walking on Shabbat, and a Jew would drive by me on Shabbat, they would duck. Today, they pull over and say hello. So that's another radical change.
Thank you very much. And we're very, very familiar with that type of sociological reality. Rabbi Scheier, if you could give us an introduction to the synagogue that you represent and the demographic.
Certainly, and in great rabbinic tradition, I won't address the question directly before saying a few nice words about the moderator and about my fellow panelists. I would say the three of us are good friends and colleagues. And Rabbi Mark Fishman, thank you for moderating, Rabbi of Congregation Beth Tikva in Dollard. And it's wonderful to have this conversation. This whole evening just emerged out of a kind of a casual conversation that we were having amongst ourselves. And it's great to see so many joining us for this congregation. I have been rabbi of Sha'ar Shamayim since 2004. And in hearing my senior colleague, Rabbi Poupko's remarks and tenure, I realize now that in my 17th or my 18th year, about to complete 17 years, I am now at the point in my Montreal career that Rabbi Poupko was at when I first arrived. So I've reached the half-life of his tenure, and I'm looking out for my younger colleagues because he was always so gracious to me. So I'm now have that responsibility to look out for new rabbis as we all do. Congregation Sha'ar Shamayim is, we pride ourselves on being the oldest Ashkenazi congregation in Canada, founded in 1846. And I would say one of the ways in which our community has changed over the years is that when I first came, I was told that, in Westmount, you don't need French. The signs say stop here. They don't say you don't need French at all. This is an Ashkenazi Anglophone congregation. And certainly over these past 17 years, our community has grown to be much more diverse and much more integrated into the larger Montreal Jewish community, which is a bilingual community by and large. So we're here representing that community and certainly thinking of the larger Montreal Jewish community at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, just a couple of words. The synagogue, let's focus less on prior to COVID. Let's spend a couple of moments talking about during COVID. What have been some of the shifts that you have experienced over these last 15 months? What have been some of the things you've been doing differently over these last 15 months? Adam, we'll begin with you. Rabbi Scheier, we'll begin with you this time.
Absolutely. Though, if I could touch on the before COVID, because it speaks to what our experience in COVID is,
please,
or has been, is that our community is a community of dignity and majesty. If you want to experience what the Beit HaMikdash the Holy Temple in Jerusalem might have looked like on the holiest days of the year, minus the animal sacrifices. But if you wanted to experience kind of the greatness, the glory of tradition with of course the music, with of course the space, the 2,000 seat sanctuary of congregation Sha'ar Shemayim. This would be the place where you would go. That was the kind of service that we were offering, a service that creates a moment of significance, of magnitude. And that's what we've missed over these months of COVID. Is that, I mean, that's a major part of what we missed, is the inability to experience kind of the greatness of our tradition. Similar, our synagogue was constructed in the same way that the great synagogues of Europe were constructed, as a way of saying, we are here, we've arrived, we're here to stay, and look how glorious this faith, this tradition that we have is. We're going to invest sufficiently and build a place like Sha'ar HaShamayim, and we haven't had that as well. So your question was about COVID itself, about the experience.
What have you been doing differently, and how have you been shifting accordingly?
Well, I think, the answer, what have we been doing differently, is absolutely everything. There has been not one day that we have woken up in this entire period. One morning we've woken up and said, okay, today we can do the same thing we did yesterday. Because we did that for a good part of 2 centuries. We've done that. We build on our successes of yesterday, but we don't really have to reinvent ourselves in that way. We've discovered new strengths, which we'll get to perhaps later on in the conversation, what those strengths are. We've discovered new ways of communicating with people, new frequencies of communicating, not just a top-down communication, but also members of the community communicating with each other and structuring that into how we do business as a congregation. I would say everything is different.
Okay, thank you. Rabbi Poupko, what has been different for the synagogue during COVID?
I remember we all remember that week in March of 2020 when things spiraled so quickly downward. And 1 minute we thought we were heroes of prevention when we didn't allow a buffet on Purim where you had the food on the table. He said, oh, by the way, it's a funny thing, about 20 years ago, somebody asked me, what's the difference between your shul and the Sha'ar Shemayim? And my answer was one word: cutlery. Anyway, anyway, but in other words, we thought we were doing we put out hand sanitizers, and within days, everything closed. There were those visitors from New York that came in, and then there was and we spiraled very quickly to a closure that was announced to be 2 weeks. People forget this already.
2 weeks.
And I remember saying to myself, well, what's the end game? Because we closed not to keep people healthy. We didn't. The stated reason was to keep people from getting sick all at one time, to flatten the curve. I mean, that was the intent, but it very quickly became, I'm staying inside to be safe. And from that point forward, it created enormous stresses in community, I have to tell you, and on people's lives. Adolescents suffered, elderly people were isolated, people were forced to mourn alone and celebrate alone. It had a devastating impact on many. On the other hand, it renewed for many their sense of appreciation for synagogue life. We were closed from March till the end of June. We reopened as soon as we were allowed to at the end of June with the limited numbers that went. You remember, back and forth from 10 to 25 to 250, the crazy back and forth. We split up into smaller groups per room, per building. I'm not going to rehash all of the painful history of the erratic rulemaking that seemed erratic at times. And we adjusted, and we had tents for the high holidays. And, we did what everybody did, and we tried to adjust. But we're proud of the fact that we did open the end of June, that no one, as far as we know, B'li ayin hara, as they say, contracted COVID here in the synagogue, or really in any of the large synagogues in Montreal. I'm not talking about certain neighborhoods that we don't know about, but nobody contracted COVID in any of our synagogues. They're large enough to be safe in the numbers that we were allowed to have. But again, as everybody, we figured out new ways to communicate. We all figured out Zoom. We all figured out that it's wonderful to have the power to mute other Jews. It's a power we will lose at the end of COVID, that we will mourn and desperately miss. We're trying to figure out how to move the virtual power into the real world, but so far no one's figured it out. But we also learned that when people have nothing else to do because they're in isolation and under lockdown, they're more than happy to listen to a rabbi talk. But when they have anything else to do, forget about it. But so the numbers of people participating in classes skyrocketed, literally skyrocketed. And we had people from we all had this experience, people from all kinds of places that we never saw before joining us. And that was remarkably inspiring. The problem is that we've acquired some habits over COVID, and I'm not sure how easily they will be reformed upon returning to normal. That means I have a service. I do 4 services at 9 a.m. in different rooms, and I have a couple of services at 10:30. All those guys have gotten used, have gotten used to praying together and going faster and just having a smaller group. And how do we reintegrate a unified congregation after COVID, after we've been split up because of the size necessity and the numbers necessity? How do we do that? How do we bring a congregation back together again? That's a huge challenge for us going forward.
I think that the sense of community also is something, we're talking about the appreciation when we first closed down, when the community first closed down, if you'll recall, they limited it to 250, you had to have less than 250 people, no masks required yet at the time. This is March 2020. So you could go maskless, 249 people is okay, and no sense of distancing as long as you wash your hands. That was the understanding. And I think one of the levels of appreciation, which I certainly came to, was just how much we Jews get together and in big numbers. Because when they cut us down to less than 250, cut us, the whole society, all of Quebec society, to less than 250 people can gather together, I imagine for 99% of society, that made absolutely no difference in their lives. That just meant that they couldn't go to the concert at the Bell Center that they had tickets to. I actually had tickets. My Buffalo Sabres were visiting the Montreal Canadiens on March 12th, Thursday night, March 12th, 2020. And I had secured enough tickets for my kids. We're going all together for the first time. It was very exciting. I still have those tickets in my desk drawer. But I think we realized just how much community is part of our oxygen, and not having to, at the beginning, not having 250 people together was a painful existence. It was a painful adjustment for us to make. And the appreciation that people have for, I can't tell you how many times in the last year I've heard people speak to the wisdom of Shiva, how important Shiva, people who couldn't have a Shiva or couldn't have any semblance of a normal. Sometimes we did outside, sometimes we did fewer numbers depending on what the regulations were at the time. But people who said, how wise Shiva is, because in this pandemic, you're just left to yourself. And it's almost like everyone is in Shiva, because if the idea of Shiva is to stay at home and not really, go out and do your normal thing, well, that's been everyone's experience for this whole time. So there's wisdom in what we do as a community.
Also, you remind me of those first months when so many of our elderly were passing away in residences and in nursing homes, and how horrific that was. I mean, and to use the word carnage, I don't think is an overstatement. So many died. If you look at the excess deaths in the Jewish community in 2020, it was over 200. And those were devastating days. People couldn't say goodbye to their mothers or fathers. And it was so painful, which has left real lingering, real profound pain, and regret. And it was the conditions imposed upon families during those months, and in some cases continue to be imposed, are so difficult. And the lack of Shiva, as Rabbi Scheier so eloquently put it, the lack of Shiva. I mean, this isn't a reason, but maybe to use the expression, a lesson or a silver lining is we learn to appreciate things like Shiva more. We do. Mm-hmm. And maybe we do appreciate the synagogue more. I mean, it really struck me when it was on Pesach. I think I was taking a walk when the shul was completely closed in 2020. Everything was completely closed. And I'm taking a walk, which I don't usually do. I was taking a walk and I ran into somebody who says, it almost has tears in their eyes. I said, Rabbi, I want to get back to shul. When you realize that, it means a lot to people, and it's important and it's valuable what we do. And that's certainly, and I hope those lessons persist. Also, the painful reality of the isolated seniors in our community who don't have kids around. and how much I know Rabbi Scheier did for that, and how much you did, Rabbi Fishman. We all tried to do to reach out to people who are alone, and how tough that was. I remembered one time during COVID, I was calling a 100-year-old Holocaust survivor, and I have to tell you something. I call him up, I wish him a happy birthday. He turned 100. I wish him he wasn't, and he didn't answer his phone. And so I call him on the other number I have for him. He's sitting in the office, right? He's at work, right? So sometimes, in some cases, the older people were much more resilient than the younger people. The older people who had seen much worse sometimes said, "Oh well," but sometimes, but not always, not always. But this was tough on a lot of people. This was really tough.
I'd like to use some of the comments that you've just said and to kind of ask, as we now open up again, or please God soon, will we be simply going back to where we were prior to this pandemic, or will there be a new synagogue that we are looking at? Yes, there has been outreach campaigns. Yes, there has been the wonders of Zoom. What is a synagogue? I know that's a very simple question, but what are we in the business of? What is our product? And how will we, in the near future, be growing, and perhaps I'll even use the word transforming, to incorporate what we have learned going forwards? What is a synagogue, Rabbi Scheier? What are we in the business of?
Look, the big question of what does it look like? What does Shul look like post-pandemic? I think the big answer is it looks like pre-pandemic. That's number one. I just want to put that out there. I think we've learned a lot of lessons which will apply. We could talk to that. We started talking about our community. Sha'ar Shamayim founded in 1846. The community was 20 years old during the American Civil War. It was 70 years old when World War I started. It went through epidemics. We talk about the Spanish flu. We talk about the birth of the State of Israel, 1967, 1973. The events that this community has witnessed, and the next day shown up for Shul in spite of or because of. You could list all the events in history. When our congregation was founded, they were only up to the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. Like this is a long time ago. So this is we talk about elasticity, we talk about the human ability to read. And I think the reason for that is because we do meet a core need of humanity. That's what synagogues, if we didn't believe that, we rabbis and those on this call, we wouldn't be in this business. We wouldn't be in this conversation if we didn't believe that human beings, number one, need community in a very real, tangible sense. And that means speaking to other people, learning from other people face to face. There is the Zoom option, but nothing replaces interpersonal interactions. That's number one. Number two, the concept of identifying with a larger group, working for something that's greater than the individual. That's something we believe in. We believe that adds to people's lives. We're not here to convince you that, come to Shul because this is what you'll get. Come to Shul because this is how you can give. That's the message we give to the members of our community, because this is part, again, of a core, not Jewish, but human need to be part of something greater, to give, to lead lives of greater significance. And of course, the spiritual needs that we respond to in community and in Judaism and in structured prayer, which is all structured around the concept of a minyan, of tefillah, of the formal structures of Judaism. This is all part of what our souls yearn for and thirst for. And I do believe that need will always be there. We could talk about the nuances, what we've learned, how we're going to change, and what we've done to kind of adapt to that and to provide those services while we can't be there in person. But I believe that post-pandemic Judaism will look shockingly similar to pre-pandemic Judaism, with a few small nuance changes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rabbi Poupko.
I'll tell you what I fear. And stepping back just from my synagogue to maybe just a larger picture just for a moment. But everything Rabbi Scheier said, I couldn't agree with more. the need to come back to synagogue. Whether it's this Rosh Hashanah, we hope everyone's back in Shul Rosh Hashanah. There will still be people who will be freaked out by the idea of sitting in the same room with that many people, right? Even if they're double vaxxed and everybody's double vaxxed. We're all going to have to figure out policies if we let in the unvaxxed, right, for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and what we're going to do with that. But there's no question that there's a gradual. It'll be gradual. It won't be immediate, like flicking a switch. Some people are comfortable coming today. Some people won't be comfortable coming for several months. But what I fear, and I hope I'm wrong, is that some really good habits have been broken for some people. Whether it means families that always gathered for Pesach and with the Seders, with the extended family, maybe they learned they don't need it or want it, or it doesn't mean that much to them. I don't know, but they've learned they can stay home. And I'm afraid that habits have been broken. I'm afraid that the demographic that built our synagogues, and that's all of our synagogues, was already dwindling in number just due, to the shift of generations. And that generation, I mean, is the Ashkenazic traditional Jew who may or may not have been Shomer Shabbat, right? Who wasn't necessarily orthopraxis, but Orthodox affiliated. That, I see people on the Zoom call who I'm talking about their parents who love going to shul. Their children were not so much, and the Jew who's not observant in the way that an Orthodox rabbi would call observant. I know that these are all dangerous words, but I'm talking colloquially more than academically. And sensitively, that demographic, which was already waning in its enthusiasm to wake up on a Saturday morning and go to a synagogue, I'm not sure if they're coming back so fast. I'm worried that that the Jew who like that, who really, those were the Jews that built the Montreal Jewish community. Those were the Jews who built our schools and built our synagogues and filled our pews, especially on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur and holidays, and even every Shabbat. I'm not sure that those Jews are coming back so fast, and that really, really worries me. That really is that's a serious concern. Remember, Montreal has a very unique dynamic. Rabbi Fishman, the synagogue in which you're rabbi, Beth Tikva, if it was anywhere else in North America, would not be Orthodox. Let's be blunt. The only reason it has a mechitza is because of Rabbi Scheier's synagogue, because the Jews in Dollard said, well, if the Westmount people can sit with a mechitza, so can I, right? That's the only reason Beth Tikva has a mechitza. Let's be blunt, okay? Because it was socially acceptable to continue to separate men and women in the classiest place, so the so the schleppers in Dollard could do it also. And I say that with love. So, but that's the truth. That's the truth. The only reason Beth Ora has a mechitza is because the only reason Beth Zion had a mechitza is because of the Sha'ar Shemayim. No one kept our shuls with mechitzas better than Sha'ar Shemayim. People don't realize that. The other thing that's unique about Montreal is that for the traditional Jew, they all sent their kids to day school in the main. Those Jews, if they lived in Denver, would not have sent their kids to day school. And because of that, they would have taken their kids to synagogue on a Saturday morning because they didn't get enough Judaism during the week because they were in public school and maybe a little bit of Hebrew school. Those Jews in Montreal were in Bialik and in Herzliya and all of our day schools. And because of that, Saturday morning was for skiing and hockey. And because of that, because they were 5 days in a Jewish building, they don't need to see a shul. And therefore, they were educated as Jews through high school often, but never educated in synagogue literacy. Yeah. In the experiential education of synagogue literacy. And that created, so the advantage of having the schools, which I wouldn't trade for anything. I don't regret it. I wouldn't trade that advantage. There's also a disadvantage. And the disadvantage was they didn't go to synagogue, as they would have had they been in the suburb of St. Louis going to their conservative synagogue. That's what they would have been doing in St. Louis, these Jews. And those Jews I'm worried about. It's those Jews and their children I'm worried about in the future, about their continued affiliation, attendance, involvement. And I think that's a dynamic that I think is underappreciated by Montrealers because they haven't necessarily been exposed to the other, but that's a dynamic which is problematic.
Thank you. Rabbi Scheier, I see that you would like to respond to some of those thoughts.
Firstly, I just want to say publicly how much I appreciate Rabbi Poupko's insights into Montreal Jewry, which have been sustaining me for many, many years. And I share certainly the concerns that he expresses. And if I could just, offer a reflection, when we first closed Shul, March 13th, Friday, March 13th, 2020, we made that decision to actually close down for services. It was a painful decision. And I'm not sure why. I mean, I think I know why it was so painful, but at the time I told myself that it's painful because we've never done this before. Because in the 170 something year history of my synagogue, we have met every single day or every single Shabbat, or however you want to phrase that. We have an uninterrupted continuity or continuum of prayer from the founding of the congregation until today. And it's going to be interrupted by Scheier's decision or by Fishman's decision, by Poupko's decision, that we're going to have the responsibility to the generation. I mean, it was a silly way of thinking in retrospect. Obviously, we should have, the right decision was to close. And then I read something very helpful to me. I forgot, I wish I remembered who said it, but it was some rabbi who said, it's a good thing that God doesn't work for the Guinness Book of World Records. It's a good thing that God doesn't care about the records that you're trying to keep going of uninterrupted prayer. And that made an impact on me. But reflecting on it, I think what Rabbi Poupko was speaking to is what I was really afraid of, which is the Jew who is coming to Shul because it's something they like to do, but not out of classic Orthodox commitment to prayer. The demographics say that within a classic Orthodox community, 90% of the membership shows up every Shabbat. And within the other denominations or more liberal denominations, it's 10% of the membership that shows up every Shabbat. And the Orthodox synagogues in Montreal, our demographics or our attendance leans more towards the liberal community attendance than the classic Orthodox or modern Orthodox attendance. And if we're attracting 10, 15% of our membership every Shabbat, what's going to happen if we don't meet for these 2 weeks that we close down? And then the fear is what's going to happen now that we've been closed for a month or 2 months, or now that we're reopening, but in limited numbers and we can't get people. And now that some of those people, we've actually lost them to COVID. They've actually passed away. Some of our regulars who left Shul when we canceled it, we're going to see them that Shabbat, and now we'll never be back. And we haven't had time to replace people, because that's what happens in the natural conversation of a community is people leave, people come in, and we haven't attracted anyone new in the last year and a half to our community. We haven't replaced any of the members that we've lost, and that's very scary. So I think these concerns and how we rebuild, this is going to be in the forefront of our minds, is that it's not just going to be that we reopen and wait for people to come, because the day we reopen and the day we're allowed to have unlimited numbers and unlimited seating is not the day in which we go back to the attendance numbers that we had on March 6th or whatever that Shabbat before Purim was, which was the last time that we were really together. Remember, we weren't shaking hands. We weren't, doing any of we were kind of aware of it, but not fully aware of it. So that Montreal Jewish identity that Rabbi Poupko described, of people who go to Shul, even though they don't fit, and they go to Shul regularly, even though they don't fit into the classic model of Shul going Orthodox Jews, I'm worried about our ability to re-attract them to our Shuls.
You remind me of something. I'll never forget the last mincha we had before closing. We knew we were going to close, that we weren't going to open the next morning. It's a couple of days after Rabbi Scheier closed, and we closed on the Tuesday after Rabbi Scheier closed on the Friday. And I remember that mincha, and we did it outside because we wanted to be more careful. We gathered on the stairs of the synagogue, and it was painful. And now my next part of my presentation is, look how wonderful I am. That's the theme. Just to warn everybody, I'll tell you, I started doing something that next morning, which I did throughout the closure. I got up every morning and came to Shul anyway. And I davened in my sanctuary, quietly, without telling anyone till today. And I did that every morning because I'm a very humble person and a remarkably good person. So I would get up every morning and go to the synagogue. I would turn on the lights. I put on my talis and tefillin, daven in my same seat. And the reason I did that, not only to maintain routine, which psychologists told us several months later is really important to maintaining mental health during isolation, but I did that because I wanted to keep faith with the people who had built that shul and built our shul. And they built the shul for it to be used and for people to daven in. So I wanted to make sure in my own small way that we kept faith, with the people who have supported us, that we kept faith with the people who built and are no longer with us. That I went every morning and I davened, and I think our places are really valuable. The community needs us. And I think it's important that we recognize that and exert great caution in how we conduct ourselves because we are valuable.
I'd like to come in and challenge both of you, however, because up until now, the conversation has centered largely on synagogue attendance for tefillah, for classic prayer, whether it be over the high holidays or on every Shabbat. And yet we know, perhaps ironically, but we know that some of our congregants, on the whole, because of how Rabbi Poupko, you described the demographic sociology of the Montreal community, that so many of our kehillat are coming for the high holidays only. We know that they've actually been more engaged in synagogue life over these last 15 months than they were previously, because the only time that they came in may have been Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And that's because of outreach, that's because of telephone committees, that's been because of cheesecake sent out on a Shavuos program, etc. I'm not hearing from either of you, and this is where I'd like you to weigh in, that the synagogue has multiple doors. The way I refer to Beth Tikva is a building of multiple doors. And I don't mean that only literally, although we have many doors to our building. But metaphorically, there is the main door we call tefillah. And for the sanctuary doors, that is the spine, the heart blood, the beating blood through our veins. There's a minyan, and there's tefillah, and there's kriyat Torah, but there is also the door of Talmud Torah. There's the door of classes, educational programming, shiurim. There's the door of chesed, the door of reaching out to the elderly and making sure that they have their shopping needs taken care of. There's the door of nichum avelim, the door of making sure that those going through the process of mourning are sufficiently taken care of. So synagogue life, especially for those members who maybe traditionally yesterday were coming only 3 days a year, tomorrow perhaps we now have a responsibility to say, we know there's a need that you have, we know that there's a desire for connection through the many doors that we offer. What does the synagogue look like for those communities and sub-communities the day after COVID? Rabbi Scheier, perhaps if you would like to begin.
It's an excellent question because, strangely, as we have, I'm going to stick with your metaphor, Rabbi Fishman, as we have closed and reopened and opened a crack and closed the door to tefillah, to prayer, other doors have stayed closed and other doors have been opened. And the doors that have been opened for us at Shar HaShamayim in our experience were the door of chesed, which was something that was not a central focus, I would say, of our congregational, that's a bold statement, but of our congregational identity in the past, but was moved to the spotlight when we found ourselves in a position to help members of our community, to help those who were not members of our community, but we were happy to help. Our whole initiative, which we undertook for the winter, of delivering food to homeless shelters near us, would have never happened without COVID. That allowed us to refocus that, and that's something that we're going to stay with moving forward. That's going to be an important part of what our community is. We're not going to lose that. But I want to speak to one door that was closed, which has been devastating, which is the door of youth. That even when we've been open, the young people, our kids, have not been in shul. And that to me, is one of the crises that we're going to have to confront when we reopen. Speaking about, again, my own congregation, many of the students in the congregation attend non-Jewish schools. These past weeks, as we know, have been very challenging for Jewish students who find themselves in classrooms where they're hearing some of the very challenging, difficult, even anti-Semitic concepts. They are living and breathing their lives on social media where they're encountering ideas that they've never encountered before and being challenged in ways, and we need to be there for them. And I thought about that in the past. How amazing would it have been to call a citywide meeting or a community-wide meeting of our high school students to come together, to sit down, to have an open conversation, instead of doing everything on Zoom. How amazing would it be to grow our youth prayer options as we reopen now, and as we think about with fresh eyes, we think about what a new prayer community looks like. We're going to have to reopen that door to our kids who have been locked out of shul for over a year now. And I don't know if they know what they're missing, if they feel what they're missing. I would say my own kids, are probably, wouldn't say that they miss shul so much. And that's our obligation now, to make sure that we can attract them back to shul and make sure that what they're finding in our synagogues is compelling and speaks to them and gives them and equips them for the challenges that they face in the world. So that's the door that I want to commit publicly to. I want to commit to keeping the chesed door open and to reopening that youth door as wide as possible as we rebuild our communities.
Thank you.
I really think Adam just identified the single number one priority. The number one priority after COVID has to be engaging the young people again in our buildings and in our experiences. I mean, it's absolutely the case that even though we've been open, we weren't open to kids. We were all advised by the health authorities not to open to kids. And that obviously kept a lot of people at home for obvious reasons. But more importantly, the kids were kept at home and more painfully. And, we had, everybody, we had youth minions before, we had junior, all these things. And we don't have them now. And getting them back, when habits are broken for that length of time for a younger person, that's much more significant than it is for an older person. And that's going to be, I think that's where we all have to, come September, when hopefully things are back and the school year's back and everyone's in school and universities are open again for in-person education and all of that. We were absent from their lives in many ways during the worst possible time, during the challenge of COVID and during the last couple of weeks, as Rabbi Scheier said. I mean, I know the calls I'm getting, I know the calls we're all getting from parents with kids in school and facing social media and some classmates. And that's going to be that's the number one, that has to be the number one priority. Absolutely, to reopen that door. And, there's nothing more crucial right now. Absolutely.
I would be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the more contemporary moments that our community has witnessed over the last week or two, specifically triggered by the violence in Israel, and how protests and demonstrations and counter demonstrations have spilled over in very overt ways into violence and anti-Semitic rhetoric and physical violence towards the Jewish community. What's fascinating to me is that the singular in-person rally, I know there have been lots of virtual rallies. It's very hard for me to still get my head around this idea. What does a virtual rally accomplish? What does a virtual rally achieve? Other than promoting internally within the community, this is of great importance to us. But the singular physical rally was defined, created, and led by students within our community. And it's so critical to realize that young adults do indeed wish to have a physical space where they can come together. There is a counter narrative that as soon as you give your bar mitzvah boy or your bat mitzvah girl their iPhone, they will be on their bed with Snapchat, with TikTok, and you will not see them until they're 21. Now, as all three of us, proud parents of teenagers, we are familiar with that counter narrative, but I don't believe it's true. I think there's still a great idealism among our young people, and among young adults in particular. I think that there is a yearning for physical belonging, physical connection. What does the synagogue look like for older teenagers? It's one thing to be able to have a mum and tot group. It's another thing to be able to have circle time with kindergarten kids. But that hardest of demographics, and yet the one that we know are so socially active and socially driven, so idealistic, the older teenagers, young 20-year-olds, what can a synagogue be for them?
I want to say that,
Rabbi Poupko.
I want to say that about that. First of all, we know from our own experiences, and we know from reading all the literature, that that demographic suffered the most in isolation. That demographic, more than any other demographic, 15, 16, and 17-year-old kids need to be with each other. They really do. Number two, again, silver lining in a horrible moment, the violence at the demonstration. Rabbi Scheier and I were there, we spoke, and the violence in the aftermath, the silver lining there, and there was a silver lining, which you just mentioned. There was young people who organized that demonstration in support of Israel. And not only that, I think I'm the oldest one on this Zoom call, I think. And I mean, of everybody, I'm the oldest one. Anyway, by far, I think, by a good day. Anyway, so my first exposure to Israel, and I've told the story before, and I apologize to those who've been inflicted with this story before, was the 6-Day War. I was born in 58, 6-Day War. I was turning 9, June 15th, 1967. And so a couple of weeks before my 9th birthday was the 6-Day War. So I grew up in a world where Israel was the hero. Israel was universally loved. And the 73 War, Entebbe, the rescue of Ethiopian Jews and then Soviet Jews, great historic Israeli figures who led lives beyond reproach, like Golda Meir and Menachem Begin. Today, the kids who are now 17 years old, what is their first memory? What is their first exposure? When being associated with Israel in the minds of the people they run into a lot is a source of stigma, not pride. Let's be blunt. And they were raised in a very different world than I was. And to see their commitment nonetheless is over inspiring. And we all know we've lost young people. We know there are Jewish kids in BDS and apartheid and independent Jewish voices. And we know what a nightmare that is when we think about it. But so many kids are so engaged. So many kids have reached out to all of us about how to engage on this issue and how to defend Israel. And they grew up in a world very different than the world I grew up in. And yet their passion is not one iota less than my own. And that is a remarkable thing. The other things we've lost during COVID, and I hope not irretrievably, the other things we've lost is that we lost, how many birthright trips did we lose? We've lost 2 March of the Livings. We lost 2 rounds of March of the Living. I mean, everyone knows how impactful those trips are. Everyone knows that the kids now, 10 years later, who are leading this community, were graduates of programs like March of the Living and the trips to Israel. And for 2 years, for 2 cycles, we haven't been able to go on the march. For all these summers, for 2 summers without birthright. I mean, this is a devastating loss. And we have to figure out how to go back to those demographics. We'll never get them all, but to work really hard to do a multiple trips as soon as we can on March of the Living to make up for the class of 2020 and the class of 2021, and to make sure in 2022 we take a lot of kids over there, a lot of kids throughout the year. We've got to do what we can to make up for this, and because it's a devastating vacuum in their lives.
Thank you. Thank you,
I'll
Rabbi
just add,
Scheier. You want to add something? What does
Yes,
this look like for the older teen, young 20-year-old?
Yeah, absolutely. And only that that this challenge is also part of what makes Montreal and the Canadian Jewish experience unique. Where I grew up in the suburbs in the US, the responsibility of a synagogue to its youth ended at high school graduation. because that's when they went off to college somewhere else, to university, and they would have a Jewish experience on campus. If you did a good enough job with them in youth group growing up, then they would go and search out their Jewish experiences, and then you would get them back only after university, or when they came back, or they wouldn't come back, or a new group would come back as young adults starting their families in your community. And that age group of post-high school, pre-adult it doesn't exist in the classic, in that North American synagogue model. We have this thing called CJEP, and we have university, which is for our local students, is also a little bit of a no man's land. I don't want to use a gendered term, but a no man's land, in that they're not living on campus. They're not completely immersed in the campus life and the experience that the campus Jewish services can offer them. And at the same time, at Shul, there's not much going on the home front for them. So just to reiterate, I don't have a magic wand to wave at this challenge, but just to reiterate our responsibility to this demographic that you're speaking to. It's immense. Absolutely.
Thank you. A question that has come in through the chat is, do you believe that if we were to pay teens and children to come into the shul as a type of serb for kids, that would incentivize them and be a welcome reason and way to bring them back in?
The only people who should be paid for going to shul are rabbis, and that should never change.
Like financial incentives, whether it's babysitting or otherwise, always work. In Montreal, we also have this very unique currency called community service hours, right, which I'm sure all the rabbis in this call have signed the forms, and that's also as good as gold. People need that. But yeah, we need incentives. Obviously, we need to get people in the building, motivate them. Some people need to be incentivized in other ways, and let each synagogue be creative in how they get the teens and the young adults into the building.
By the way, Jennifer Solomon in the chat just said I insulted cantors. Jennifer, that was the intent. I don't know.
At this point, if people do have questions that they would like to write in the chat, we do have time for a couple of questions. So now would be a time, if anyone would like to ask anything, to please fill in the chat. The rabbis have been extremely gracious with their time, and they have allotted a full hour for tonight's program. And then we will wrap up. If we don't see any questions that are coming in,
I want to end with something. I have a funny story to tell. That's completely off. But you reminded me of something. I remember when I was a very young rabbi, not unlike yourself, Rabbi Fishman. I was a very young rabbi, and I spent a couple of years in Oshawa, Ontario, before I came to Montreal. And I used to go to the rabbinical meetings in Toronto. So I was at a meeting, and the old late Rabbi Gedalia Felder was there. Zatzal, a great rabbi. And he made a disparaging comment about young rabbis in Yiddish. Oh, younger Rabbanim. He made a disparaging comment. So I knew enough Yiddish at that time even to ask him, in my own way. I said, "When wird a junger Rav an älter Rav?" When does a young rabbi become an old rabbi? And without missing a beat, he answered, "When fängt an hassen junger Rabbanim." When he begins hating younger rabbis. Now, it's true in a lot of professions. It was a very funny thing he said. But I have to say that one of the great things about being a rabbi in Montreal, when I came to this city, I was really lucky to work with wonderful people like the late Rabbi Shoham, who was a remarkable rabbi. I was blessed to be able to work with people like the late Rabbi Denberg, and to sit on a Bezdin together with people like Rabbi Hirschsprung and Rabbi Nizhnik, remarkable people. And the world has changed a lot. And the late Rabbi Schmidman, I should certainly mention as well, are extraordinary Talmud Chacham and really wonderful people. They're gone now, and that's a terrible loss. And I remember them often. And really, this community has been blessed with remarkable rabbinic leadership over the years, and I've had the real pleasure. But I have to say, it's a pleasure working with Rabbi Scheier and Rabbi Fishman. You did a great job tonight, Rabbi Fishman. I mean, really, and you weren't nervous at all. I mean, it was good.
I'd like to thank the two of you. As has been said at the beginning, in the middle, and throughout this call, we have a very beautiful friendship. And the truth is, all of Montreal's rabbis have a great sense of collegiality with one another. We're truly blessed with a sense of cohesion and mutual respect, responsibility, admiration. And to the two of you, really, Rabbi Scheier, Rabbi Poupko, there has been true rabbinic leadership that you have shown our community in a variety of ways, both publicly known as well as behind the scenes, which people will never find out about. Whether it was within your own synagogues, whether it was with the broader community, not just the Jewish community, but the broadest community at the highest levels of society. There is so much that the ordinary person does not even realize. And I'd like to bring to the attention of all of those who are listening tonight and those who are watching this on a video, just how blessed we are as a city to have such great rabbinic leadership and the friendship that is born out through this group.
Absolutely.
My father always
yet
taught me.
One more
ahead.
takeaway from COVID is, or from this experience, is the collaboration that we've been able to bring to the community. And I say bring to the community because it's always been there. I'm not embarrassed to say there have been many times late on a Friday afternoon when I'll call up Rabbi Poupko and say, so you have anything good on the Parsha? Or I'll call up Rabbi Fishman and say, you know, what do you have to teach, or what great program ideas? And we steal from each other left and right, but it's all been behind the scenes. And now, now that the members of our community are attending all events across the board and all different, they can see for themselves how much we take from each other or borrow from each other and learn from each other. That's been absolutely wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody who joined for this evening. And the private comments that I've been receiving, I'm sure the two of you as well, people would like to see more of this. It's truly amazing. There is something here that people—
I'll tell you something funny. My son who's rabbi in Palo Alto, California, called me about an issue he's having in his community recently. And I told him something my father, who was the rabbi, taught me about rabbis getting along. And I say that my father told me a long time ago, it was kind of funny. He said, never give Balabatim the pleasure of watching rabbis fight in public.
That's very wise. That's very wise. Baruch Hashem, we never have that problem because Adarabah, on the contrary, we have a beautiful collegiality and friendship. I'd like to thank the two of my friends, Rabbi Poupko, Rabbi Scheier, this evening, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining. Stay well, stay safe, stay healthy, and please God, we should all get that second vaccination very soon.
Amen.
And continue supporting each of our respective communities. We look forward to seeing you in person very, very soon. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.